Vlog number 4. Chapter 23. The new era of American history began shortly after the Civil War. This new era, known as the Gilded Age, was ushered in by the election of previous U.S. Army General Ulysses S. Grant. President Grant had been a brilliant general during the Civil War, and earned the love of his countrymen in the war. He used his fame to wave the bloody shirt in politics and take the election. The first major indicator of corruption during Grant's era was the shenanigans of Boss Tweed and his hoodlums. He stole $200 million from the city of New York and was only stopped by the newspapers and the cartoons of Thomas Nast. After the military reconstruction era of Grant, the impotent federal government was ushered in by the election of Rutherford Hayes to the presidency. His presidency ushered in an era of a return to racism against African Americans and Asians. The presidents of this era, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, and Benjamin Harrison, were considered forgettable with little to no control over the happenings of America. In an attempt to fight the growing power of trusts and monopolies, the Populist Party formed to protect urban labor and farmers. Chapter 24. The Gilded Age was also characterized by enormous improvements in industrialization. The railroads were a primary focus of this time period. One of the greatest rail projects in American history was the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Government corruption and interaction with the two companies that built it, the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railroads, caused a great deal of chaos and fraud. The land grant system and enormous subsidies caused the railroads to build inefficiently in a quest for more land and money. However, the construction of the railroads linked America together economically and culturally. A few men became very rich during this era. John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan both became millionaires in the oil and banking businesses, respectively. Women began to see themselves as independent and equal at this time, in part due to the Gilmore Girls magazine depiction of the new woman. Labor strikes and unions also characterized this time as a balance to the power of the millionaires who controlled their companies. Chapter 25. America began to move to the cities. Urbanization, due to the presence of factories, became very prominent during this era. As such, many immigrants that came from overseas began to move to the cities, increasing the population of the cities just that much more. However, mass immigration led to conflicts between old immigrants and new immigrants, and the new immigrants were viewed as inferior to the old immigrants. Despite these conflicts between Irish, old immigrants, and usually African Americans as well, more immigrants flooded in by the day. In the midst of all this, a man named Charles Darwin published a very controversial book on evolution called The Origin of Species. This brought up social Darwinism, which theorized that white people were superior to other races because of evolution. However, also during this time, writers became very prominent in America, usually for short stories and other tales. Men like Mark Twain and women like Emily Dickinson wrote some very famous works that are still read to this day. In addition to this, prohibition became an issue during this time, in part due to the women's rights movement, where prohibitionists and anti-prohibitionists argued over the issue of whether alcohol should be interfered with by the government and illegalized. It would eventually lead to the Prohibition Amendment in the Constitution. The women's rights movement also advanced during this time period. These movements would eventually lead to women's suffrage in the 19th Amendment. Chapter 26. This time period was characterized by the degradation of the Native Americans, who were slowly but surely being forced to incorporate themselves with the Americans. Native American territory was being narrowed down to its final areas, which paled in comparison to the once vast tracts of land that they had been able to occupy previously. The Native Americans became second-class citizens in the American nation, which had conquered them so many times. Some Native Americans volunteered to be incorporated and adopted American life. Some Native Americans were used as demonstration pieces in reenactments of what the West had once been like. Many Native Americans chose to fight the Americans and met with mixed results. While the majority of battles ended with landslide victories for the superior U.S. Army, some of the battles were carried by the native forces, including the Battle of Little Bighorn, where U.S. Army Colonel Custer and his men were slaughtered by an ambushing native force. While American victories usually ended in native POWs being sent to Western prisons, native victories usually ended in massacres and scalping. This enraged the American people, encouraging them to further subjugate the Native Americans. As such, the Sundance was illegalized, native communal and tribal society was eliminated, and the Indians were forced to become homesteaders after the Dawes Severalty Act. Western living was still very difficult, and many people were barely able to eke out a living. While new mines were crammed with eager miners, the farmers and homesteaders of the West continued to farm as they had before. New inventions allowed them to produce more food faster, and the railroads allowed them to send their produce to more distant markets. Cattle ranching became a growing industry and ushered in the era of the cowboy, where men on horses rode from southern plains, where cows were raised and grown, to northern meat processing plants, where they sold their cattle to feed the growing population. It was at this point that the battle between the wealthy businessmen and the farmers and industrial workers hit a new curve. The election of 1896 between William Jennings Bryan and McKinley would determine whether gold or silver would be the new standard of currency. Employers wanted gold, and employees and farmers wanted silver. McKinley's victory secured the status of the millionaires and bankers for many years to come. Chapter 27. Finally, the era of the Gilded Age and the railroads ushered America into a new age of American imperialism and empire. America had finally come full circle in its national development. While it had once been a colony of Great Britain, it was now mature enough to start colonizing other lands. Before, Uncle Sam had always wanted to be uninvolved in the rest of the world, while it turned its attention to internal affairs, as George Washington had intended. Now, America saw the potential for profit and world influence in the form of possible colonies like Hawaii, Cuba, and the Philippines. The Spanish-American War, which started with the sinking of the USS Maine, ushered in a whole new era of American foreign policy. The American Navy shifted its focus from coastal defense to international influence. The American Army and Marine Corps became shock troops for invasions. America went on the offensive and dispossessed Queen Liliuokalani for Hawaii and attacked Spanish forces in Cuba and liberated it by controlling it. The American Navy even sailed to the Philippines to defeat Spanish forces there and claim them as an American territory. For the first time, American Western expansion exceeded the borders of the continental United States. Enter Theodore Roosevelt, an ambitious man who sought to make America a world power. His Rough Riders spread American dominance throughout South America. He then became the Assistant Secretary of the Navy and learned about how the U.S. Navy could be used to demonstrate American superiority. He then uttered the famous words, "Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far." This policy and his fame got him elected President of the United States. His major accomplishments include the Panama Canal and sending the Great White Fleet around the world to demonstrate that America was a force to be reckoned with. The impact was tremendous. Following his example, America would become the world superpower by the end of the century.